Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Christianity Truth or Fiction podcast. Today we're diving into a topic that, honestly, sparks a lot of debate and curiosity. The historical Jesus. You know, the man, not just the religious figure.
Yeah, and I gotta say, Peter, for someone who mostly knows Jesus from Sunday school stories, and let's be real, a lot of internet memes, I'm genuinely curious. Because, okay, but how do we really know he even existed? Isn't that like the biggest hurdle for a lot of people like me?
That's a fantastic question, Thomas, and it's where we absolutely need to start. The idea that Jesus might not have been a real historical person is a surprisingly common one today, often fueled by what we call mythicism. But let's look at what the evidence actually shows.
Okay, lay it on me. Because my default setting is, if there aren't like security camera footage or a signed birth certificate, it's pretty hard to convince me of anything from 2,000 years ago, especially when it involves, divine claims.
And that's a fair and reasonable stance, Thomas. But the standard for ancient history isn't quite security camera footage. We rely on primary sources, archaeological finds, and corroborating accounts. What's compelling about Jesus is that he's actually mentioned by several non-Christian writers from the 1st and 2nd centuries. These aren't people trying to promote Christianity. Some of them even disliked it.
Wait, really? Non-Christian sources? Because usually when this topic comes up, it's always, well, the Bible says. And I'm like, of course the Bible says that. It's about him. That feels a bit circular, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and I appreciate that skepticism. While the New Testament is a crucial collection of historical documents in its own right, let's set it aside for a moment. We have sources like the Roman historian Tacitus. He wrote his Annals around 115 AD, and in it, he describes Nero's scapegoating of Christians for the Great Fire of Rome.
Okay, so Tacitus mentioned Christians. That doesn't necessarily prove Jesus existed, right? Just that there were people called Christians.
Excellent point, but he goes further. Tacitus explicitly states, and I'm paraphrasing a bit from his account in Annals 1544, that Christus, from whom the name Christians had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. The historical record indicates that this passage is widely accepted by historians as authentic. It confirms Jesus, his title Christus, his execution under Pilate, and the origin of the Christian movement.
Whoa. Okay, that's a little more specific than I expected. So a Roman historian, who clearly wasn't a fan of Christians, basically confirmed the key details of the Christian narrative about Jesus' death? That's kind of wild.
Precisely. And he wasn't alone. We also have Pliny the Younger, a Roman governor in Bithynia, who wrote to Emperor Trajan around 112 AD seeking advice on how to deal with Christians. In his letters, specifically letters 1096 through 97, Pliny describes how Christians would meet on a fixed day, sing hymns to Christ as to a god, and bind themselves by an oath not to commit crimes. This tells us a lot about early Christian practices and their belief in Jesus' divinity.
So basically they were having like worship services for this Christ guy, and binding themselves to not be criminals? Sounds like a pretty good club, honestly. Though, worshipping as to a god is a pretty big leap from he was a real person.
It is, and that's the point where the historical figure intersects with faith, Thomas. But from a purely historical standpoint, Pliny confirms not only the existence of Christians, but also their core belief that Christ was central to their worship and they considered him divine. It speaks to the profound impact Jesus had, almost immediately after his time.
Fair enough, but still, these are Roman guys. What about like Jewish sources? He was, Jewish, right? You'd think his own people would have more to say.
Absolutely, and that brings us to Josephus, a 1st century Jewish historian. He wrote extensively about Jewish history for a Roman audience. There are 2 key passages in his Antiquities of the Jews that mention Jesus. The first, often called the Testimonium Flavianum in Antiquities 1833, is more debated among scholars regarding its original wording, as it appears to have been interpolated or embellished by later Christian copyists.
Aha! See, this is where my skepticism kicks in. When you say interpolated, that sounds like someone just added stuff in later to make it sound better. How can we trust anything then?
That's a legitimate concern, Thomas. But the scholarly consensus, even among very critical historians, is that a core passage within the Testimonium Flavianum is authentic. It likely referred to Jesus as a wise man, a teacher, someone who won over many Jews and many of the Greek, and mentioned his crucifixion under Pilate and the continuation of his followers. Josh McDowell, in his apologetics work, often highlights how even the most skeptical scholars tend to agree on this core. It's the overtly Christian affirmations like, "He was the Christ," or "He appeared to them alive again on the third day," that are widely considered later additions.
So basically, someone took a factual historical account and sprinkled in some divine pixie dust to make it more biblical? I mean, I guess it makes sense that they would. But it's still frustrating trying to untangle it all.
It is a complex task, but it speaks to the rigorous nature of historical research. However, there's another passage from Josephus that is far less debated, in Antiquities 2091. In this one, Josephus explicitly refers to James, the brother of Jesus who was called Christ. This reference is almost universally accepted as authentic because it's a brief, matter-of-fact statement, not designed to promote Christian belief.
Okay, that's pretty compelling. So he had a brother named James, and this Josephus guy just casually mentions him as the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ. It's not like some dramatic pronouncement, it's just there. That's a strong piece of evidence for his existence, I'll admit.
Exactly. When you combine these non-Christian sources, Tacitus, Pliny, and Josephus, they form a powerful cumulative case. The historical record indicates that these independent accounts corroborate several core facts. Jesus existed, he was called Christ, he was a wise teacher, he was crucified under Pontius Pilate during Tiberius's reign, he had followers who worshipped him as God, and his movement spread rapidly, eventually leading to persecution.
This is all fascinating, but I'm still having trouble with, okay, so we have these few snippets from outside sources. It's not exactly like a full biography, is it? You'd think someone as impactful as Christians claim Jesus was would have more extensive documentation.
That's a very common and understandable thought, Thomas. But it's important to remember the context of the first century. For most people, especially those outside the ruling elite, very little was written down, and even less survived. The amount of extra-biblical attestation for Jesus is actually quite remarkable for a figure of his time and social standing, far more than for many other historical figures we readily accept.
So you're saying if we apply the same historical documentation standard to other ancient figures, a lot of them would vanish into thin air too?
In many cases, yes. The Roman Emperor Tiberius, for example, under whom Jesus was crucified, doesn't have nearly as many direct, contemporary, non-governmental writings about his personal life or teachings as Jesus does. Yet no one doubts Tiberius existed. It's a matter of applying consistent historical methodology.
Huh. That's a pretty good point. I guess my baseline for evidence was maybe a bit skewed by modern expectations. It's just, it feels like there's so much mystery surrounding him, which always makes me suspicious. Like, why aren't there more artifacts? More places he definitely touched?
Another excellent point, and that leads us to archaeology. While we don't have, say, Jesus's personal diary or a house with Jesus lived here painted on it, archaeology plays a crucial role in validating the context of the New Testament narratives. We've found the Pool of Bethesda, the city of Capernaum, the Roman pavement where Pilate might have condemned Jesus. These findings don't prove Jesus's miracles, but they confirm the historical accuracy of the places and settings described in the Gospels, lending credibility to the accounts as a whole.
So, it's like confirming the backdrop of a play, even if you don't have the scriptwriter's notes on the actor's intentions. That makes sense. It means the stage was real, which makes the story more plausible.
Exactly. And let's not forget the early Christian writings themselves. While you're right to be critical of internal sources, the sheer volume and early dating of the New Testament manuscripts are astounding in the ancient world. We have thousands of Greek manuscripts, some fragments dating back to the 2nd century, incredibly close to the events themselves. This is a level of textual attestation virtually unparalleled for any other ancient work.
Okay, that's the other big one, the Bible itself. We've discussed this before, and I admit, I am leaning toward your explanation. But there are a lot of us who still think that it was written hundreds of years later, and then translated a million times, so how could it possibly be accurate? Like that mythical, really long game of telephone.
That's a common misconception, Thomas. And as we've discussed, the majority of New Testament books were written within decades of Jesus' crucifixion, mostly between 50 and 90 AD. For example, Paul's letters, which mention key events like Jesus' death, resurrection appearances, and the establishment of the Eucharist, date to the 50s. That's incredibly early. Many historians would jump at that kind of proximity for other ancient figures.
So, not hundreds of years later. 50 to 90 years old. Still a gap, but definitely not what I thought. And the game of telephone aspect? All those translations and copies?
That's where textual criticism comes in. We have so many manuscripts, over 5,800 Greek New Testament manuscripts alone, plus thousands more in Latin, Syriac, Coptic, that scholars can compare them to reconstruct the original text with a very high degree of certainty. The game of telephone argument often overstates the impact of variations. The vast majority are minor spelling differences or word order, not affecting core doctrines or historical accounts. We're far more confident in the original wording of the New Testament than almost any other ancient text.
This is all pretty eye-opening, honestly. I've always heard these blanket dismissals, but I haven't really dug into the actual evidence. It's like hearing a summary of a complicated court case from someone who only heard the opening statements.
That's a fantastic analogy, Thomas. And that's exactly why understanding the historical methodology is so important. We're not talking about blind faith here, we're talking about historical inference based on available data. The consensus among historians, whether they are believers or not, is that Jesus of Nazareth was a real person who lived in the 1st century and was executed by the Romans.
Okay, I'll concede that point. The evidence for his existence as a historical person, and even some of the circumstances of his death, seems pretty solid from these non-Christian sources alone. I guess I just always defaulted to the idea that it was all church propaganda, you know? Like, if you question it, you're being disrespectful. Which always turned me off.
And that's unfortunate, because healthy skepticism and genuine inquiry are exactly what history thrives on. It's not about shutting down questions, but about finding answers where the evidence leads. The question isn't, did Jesus exist? For most historians, that's settled. The more interesting and perhaps more challenging questions begin after that. What kind of person was he? What did he teach? What led to his crucifixion? And of course, the claims of his resurrection.
Which, I'm guessing, is a whole other podcast episode, if not a series. But seriously, this has been incredibly clarifying. I came in thinking it was all shaky ground, and you've definitely put some solid foundations under it for me. I still have a lot of questions about the miracle stuff, obviously. But just knowing he was actually there makes a huge difference.
And that's exactly what we hope for here, Thomas, to encourage further investigation. For anyone listening, if you're interested in diving deeper, scholars like Gary Habermas, Josh McDowell, and Ben Witherington have done extensive work on the historical Jesus, drawing on archaeological, textual, and non-Christian sources. There's a rich field of study out there.
I might actually check some of those out. Who knew history could be so detective-like? Thanks, Peter, for laying it all out without making me feel like an idiot for asking. It's honestly a refreshing change.
My pleasure, Thomas. And thank you to everyone joining us on the Christianity Truth or Fiction podcast. We hope this discussion has given you a new perspective on the historical Jesus and encouraged you to explore the evidence for yourselves. Until next time, keep asking those big questions.